joining us for our lunch bunch. Thanks, Karen. Today we are thrilled to have Megan Wilson from the Georgia chapter of the Alzheimer's Association with us. And Megan is going to tell us a little bit more about her role. And then she is going to talk about Alzheimer's, which is something that many of us encounter as we provide caregiving for our older family members. So Megan, take it away.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So my name, of course, is Megan Wilson. I'm the program manager for Southwest Georgia for the Alzheimer's Association. So basically what that means is that I am in charge of all of our education programming for about 52 counties in Southwest Georgia. We also do care partner support groups, and we also do early stage engagement programs like yoga and other things for people that are actually affected by Alzheimer's or any form of dementia. So today we're just going to kind of do our general education about understanding Alzheimer's and dementia. So we're going to talk about what some of the differences are between the two, and just kind of educate a little bit about all of that. So can everybody see my screen? If you can just give me a thumbs up, I can see y'all. So, okay, awesome. Let me double check that. Okay, the sound is working, because I do have some videos in here for y'all too. So if anybody has any issues hearing, just please let me know. Put something in the chat and I'll be able to see it really quick. But we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so here's learning objectives. So like I said, we're going to compare the two, so Alzheimer's and dementia, because they are different. We're going to talk about how Alzheimer's disease actually affects the brain. We're going to talk about some risk factors, the stages of the disease, some current FDA-approved treatments, and we're going to talk a little bit about research, and then, of course, the resources that we have through the association. See. And just for time's sake, I'm skipping through these questions, but just so you guys are aware, the question does say approximately how many people are currently living with Alzheimer's disease. So the answer to this question is more than 6 million. So that is a huge, huge number. It is increasing exponentially. And as far as how many Americans provide unpaid care for people living with Alzheimer's or dementia, so we have about 6 million that are living with the disease. So of course that number is going to be almost double that, about 11 million. So that's a lot of people that are living with the disease, and that's a lot of people that are care partnering as well. So here's a quick little video about some of our statistics associated with the disease. So just really quickly, I like to kind of keep it a little bit interactive. So out of all of those statistics, if you guys want, which one was the most interesting to you or the most shocking, and you can just drop it in the chat, and we'll kind of talk about it as we go. The one that is most shocking to me certainly is the 1 in 3, right? I think about my mom, I think about my Nana, I think about my aunt, and compared to my kiddos and my husband, they're the most important people in my life. And if you asked me to just sit down and pick one out of three, that is so profound and so shocking. But it's true. About 33% of all individuals 85 or older have some form of Alzheimer's or dementia. After age 65, your risk of Alzheimer's or dementia increases exponentially. It doubles every 5 years. So it definitely is a huge issue. Here's another question. And you can just answer this to yourself. But Alzheimer's is a normal part of the aging process. And this, of course, is false. So Alzheimer's disease is a brain disease that causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. It is 100% not a normal part of aging. And here's another one. So people younger than age 65 can get Alzheimer's. This is true. We have seen, of course, it's less common, but people younger than 65 can develop Alzheimer's disease. We've seen people as young as 40s get diagnosed at this point, which our testing has gotten exponential, like so much better with our ability to diagnose. And of course, treatment options being available as well. But we are seeing it younger and younger. So we call that younger onset or early onset. And here's another quick video.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual. But there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
So the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, because a lot of times you do hear the terms kind of interchangeably. So Alzheimer's disease is actually the cause of dementia. So like she said, you have dementia, which is the umbrella term, and then you have all these other diseases that are actually the cause of the dementia. So the dementia itself, it comes from the word demented, so it's a state of being. So I always like to use the example, you can have 14, 15, a younger person that has had a traumatic brain injury or something like that, they are technically in the state of having dementia because dementia itself and that state affects their ability to care for themselves. It affects their memory, thinking, and behavior. But dementia itself is not the disease. So the underlying cause, which would be Alzheimer's, Lewy bodies, frontotemporal, you can have alcohol-induced dementia. These are all those underlying causes there.
Certainly, having the diagnosis of Lewy body was helpful in our planning because we began to understand where this was coming from in the brain, where otherwise we would not have known. Like we knew something was happening, but what was it? To give it a label actually helped, although it was a big umbrella. It explains some of the characteristics and symptoms that we were experiencing and seeing.
So everyone experiences all of these symptoms differently, and that's the interesting thing, and that's why it's so important to get an accurate diagnosis, because dementia, of course, is a general term for a collection of these symptoms. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia, so it makes up 60 to 80% of all cases. But when it comes to resources, when it comes to treatment options and things like that, when it comes to making decisions about someone's future, having a very specific and accurate diagnosis is so important, because it could be any one of those in the list of diseases that causes the dementia. So I just want to reiterate again that Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging, and it's a progressive brain disease. So what does it do in the brain? So let's talk about that specifically.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alsheimer described specific changes in the brain, what we now call the formation of plaques and tangles. Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and impacts memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to brain tissue loss and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss, behavioral issues, problems with thinking, planning, and at the end stage, swallowing.
So, like Dr. Carrillo said, just to reiterate, Alzheimer's itself causes the nerve cells to die, which leads to shrinkage in the brain. And the reason that these nerve cells die is because our brain is a really vascular organ, right? So 20 to 25% of all the blood that pumps from our heart, every single time it pumps, goes straight up to our brain. That's why at the association and what research has shown us is that whatever's healthy for the heart is healthy for the brain. So when these plaques and tangles start to develop and cause the brain to not be able to communicate with itself properly, this leads to the shrinkage and the nerve cell death. So these brain changes, which is the disease in itself, Alzheimer's, causes these changes in memory, thinking, and behavior, also known as dementia. The disease itself, of course, is named after Dr. Alsheimer, and he's the one that first found these formation of plaques and tangles. And interestingly enough, it was because he was seeing these symptoms in his own wife. So that's a little tidbit for you. So now we're going to talk about risk factors. So we've talked about what the disease does in the brain, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, what are some other causes of dementia. So now we're going to talk about personal risk. So this one always gets everybody. What is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's disease? And the answer is age. So like I said, after age 65, the risk of Alzheimer's doubles every 5 years. 34% of people 85 and older have Alzheimer's disease. So that is a little bit over 1 in 3 people. These others, so genetic, family history, they are also risk factors, but age is the greatest known risk factor there.
Alzheimer's disease is marked by specific brain changes that result in the clinical changes in individual experiences. That is, changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. And ultimately, Alzheimer's is fatal. The exact cause for these changes is unknown, but there are some hints as to what may contribute to an individual's risk. Age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's. And when we look at populations of people, we see an increased risk over the age of 65. However, Alzheimer's is not normal aging. Family history is also a known risk factor. Research has shown that those who have a parent or a sibling with Alzheimer's are more likely to develop the disease, and that risk increases if more than one family member has Alzheimer's. When we talk about the genes involved in Alzheimer's, there are 2 categories that could potentially be involved: risk genes and deterministic genes. Risk genes increases an individual's risk for developing the disease, but does not guarantee that they will develop Alzheimer's. Deterministic genes, which are rare for Alzheimer's, guarantee that the person will develop the disease.
So she talked about specifically 2 different types of these genes. And so one of them is the deterministic genes, and the other one is the risk associated genes. So of course, like for example, I think it was Chris Hemsworth that came out recently. And of course it's not super common, like she said, with Alzheimer's disease to have the definitive, you have the gene for Alzheimer's. He came out and said that he did have that gene. And the same thing, if you've seen the movie Still Alice, we love to show that. It's such a great movie for for showing real true life experience. And the daughter, she had that gene as well. Family history certainly does make a difference. But like she said, age is still the greatest known risk factor there. So there are some populations that are also at a higher risk. Black Americans are about twice as likely as white Americans to have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. Hispanic Americans are about 1.5 times as likely to have the disease, and 2/3 of Americans living with Alzheimer's are women. So the interesting thing about this is, because like we were talking about earlier, the heart-brain connection there, right? So all of these populations, we all know that they are at a significantly increased risk for heart disease, especially women. It's the #1 killer of women is heart disease. So they definitely believe that there's some correlation between being at a higher risk for heart disease, and that kind of matching up with the risk for Alzheimer's and dementia as well. So, like we said, that the greatest known risk factor is age. Family history is also another risk factor. Risk genes and deterministic genes are the two types that you want to remember that are associated with Alzheimer's. And then, of course, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women are at an increased risk for Alzheimer's compared to white males. So now we're going to get into the stages, and this has changed a little bit over time.
I'm like an overachiever. And when you're unable to deliver or you're not performing at the same pace that you once did before, that's frustrating. It's frustrating to not know where you place things. It's frustrating to not be able to explain to someone the problems that you're having. You can't articulate it in a way. It's frustrating to read something and you forgot what you read. It's frustrating to continuously have to change your password and you just changed it last week and you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again.
I'm going to try to see if I can. Okay, here we go. So these are the stages. And like I said before, I totally forgot that Teresa's part was right there. So you'll have to forgive me for that one. But so Alzheimer's disease is a continuum. And this does look a little bit different than what we knew traditionally as mild, moderate, and severe. So this goes all the way back to the asymptomatic stage, which means there's no symptoms at all. We've been able to identify that although there's no cognitive symptoms, there's possible biological changes in the brain already that can be identified. So if anybody, has family history, even if they're younger, they can start testing at this stage, have imaging and all of that. The next stage is MCI due to Alzheimer's disease. So we call that mild cognitive impairment. It is the mild before the mild. This is where you have very early stage of cognitive ability loss. And this is also this stage that everybody has, all the researchers between MCI stage and the mild stage, they've identified that as a really key point to start beginning on some of these treatments that are now becoming available to treat the underlying causes of the disease versus just managing the symptoms. So then you have the three stages that we kind of all know. So the mild, moderate, and severe. And in mild, this typically involves some symptoms that interfere with daily activities. This is where you're going to begin to have issues with holding conversations, maybe forgetting words every now and then, relying on some memory aids. And then as you move into the moderate stage, you're going to have much more pronounced symptoms that interfere with many daily activities. So this is where you're going to have issues with driving. You're going to have issues with how you actually perceive and see the world. You're going to have vision changes. You're going to have personality changes. Anything that the brain controls, there's going to be some changes there. And it's going to be much more pronounced in this stage. And then in the severe stage, you're going to have symptoms that interfere with most daily activities. So this is going to be the peak point where you're needing care. You're needing someone to help you kind of manage daily tasks. And then, of course, you get to the end stage where your body is not able to regulate autonomic functions. So regulation of blood pressure, like Dr. Carrillo said earlier, swallowing, all of these things that your body kind of knows to do, but is ultimately controlled by your brain, right? So those are the stages there. So we have the 3 broad phases. We also have mild, moderate, and severe. Like to point out that no 2 individuals experience the symptoms or the progression in the same way. We always say that if you've met one person with Alzheimer's or dementia, you've met one person. Everybody's experience is different. And then people, of course, progress through the stages at different rates as their abilities change. So now we're going to talk about some FDA approved treatments. And this is interesting. So, the first description of the disease was in 1906. We didn't have any type of medication until 1996, which was Aricept. So Aricept, Exelon, Razidine, Namenda, and Namzaric, which is 2 of those medications joined together. Those are all medications that were just treating the symptoms, okay? So starting in 2021, we had a huge breakthrough, and it was marketed as Aduhelm. This is the first medication in its class that targets specifically the amyloid or the plaque buildup in the brain. There was a little bit of wonkiness as far as research goes with this medication, but there's been another one that's come out. It was actually FDA approved back in June, and it's called lecanemab. There's another medication that's supposed to be hitting the market really soon. It's called, you guys will have to forgive me, I'm going to butcher the name, donanemab. So those are all in the same class. And what they actually do is they target the amyloid plaque buildup in the brain, and they actually help the body to dispose of that plaque buildup appropriately through kidney function and all of that. So it's very, very exciting. It's not a cure. These medications have been approved for coverage under Medicare and Medicaid. They're still pretty expensive. They are administered intravenously. And then, of course, it's really important to talk with the doctor about risk versus benefit, because there are risks, of course, associated with these medications, just like anything else. But we're on the right track as far as getting a step closer to the cure. As far as lecanemab goes, they have done some clinical trials, and it has added 3 to 5 years of good health per stage of the disease. So that in itself is extremely exciting. We're giving people more time now back in their lives to keep their memories. So I want to say, like I said, it's very important to talk to a healthcare professional. Everyone experiences this differently. So if you have any interest or you want to know more about treatments, it's always important to talk with your doctor and to weigh out those risks versus benefits. I'm going to skip through these for time's sake.
Participating in a clinical study is one way that everyone can get involved in a very direct way in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. And for people who currently have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, there are some additional benefits. You get access to very close medical care. You also may be among the first people to have access to the treatments that will eventually prove to work.
You might hear the phrase negative trial, which means it didn't hit the endpoint. It didn't result in an FDA-approved treatment for the disease. But I think the only negative trial is one that doesn't provide us with valuable information. If the trial is well designed and is a good scientific experiment, we can get extremely valuable data that can help plan the next trial and make it even better than the last one. And it gets you that much closer to that FDA-approved drug, to that effective treatment, and maybe someday even prevention.
So that's where we're going as far as Alzheimer's research goes.
By participating,
and we are doing tons of clinical trials. If anybody's interested in learning more about those, we have a program that's called Trial Match, and the website's right there. But we're going places as far as research goes. People living with dementia, care partners, and healthy volunteers are all needed for clinical studies. And so that they include drug and non-drug studies that are taking place. A lot of them are out of Atlanta and Emory. Emory is doing some really, really wonderful things and just making strides for research. So now we're going to talk about the Alzheimer's Association specifically and some resources that we have. So these are 3 resources that we have. This is our 24/7 helpline. So if you or your loved one or anybody that you know is in need of support, you can call this number 365 days a year, anytime, day or night, and reach out for a licensed clinician, and they will help you care plan. They will help you locate resources locally. They will help you pretty much with whatever you need. Even if you just need an ear or a shoulder to lean on. We also have our online website, alz.org. It is a wealth of information. And then, of course, we are in communities nationwide. So if you go to alz.org/CRF, that's our community resource finder. You can figure out where all of our support groups are, all of our education programming that we're doing, and other resources that are available to you as well. So any resources as far as, let's say you need respite care, or you need some options for housing, or you need help finding a doctor, that is all available to you.
I've had a couple of
When I went to the Alzheimer's Association website, which is alz.org, there I was trying to find out more about what was Alzheimer's, what really is this disease, what is younger onset Alzheimer's, what is dementia, is there a cure, how long has this been around, how many people are affected by this, where can I go for resources, where can I go for help, what do I do with this? How can I handle this? Is there more people like me out there? Is there someone that I can talk to if I need to? And there I found the support line that's 24 hours a day. And there I found where I can go for workshops, where I can go and read things and postings that people have done, where I can find out what events is happening in the Alzheimer's Association, where I can see how it's affecting people around the globe.
So that is what we are here for. Anybody that's needing support. And if you have any questions about how to get involved, we also have information about volunteering, advocacy. We also are in walk season now, so I'm sure whatever community you're in, there's a local walk near you. And you can find all of this information on our website, alz.org. So does anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot of information kind of very quickly. But does anybody have any questions for me? This is my favorite part of the whole presentation. And I typically get a lot of questions about medications, things like that. So does anybody have any questions?
Megan, I'm a little curious about from the asymptomatic stage to the next stage, what are some of the warning signs we can look for at that stage in the progression?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a few. So just based off of we have 10 warning signs specifically. And you can find those on the website. I can actually pop that in the chat for you guys if anybody's interested. But you're really gonna want to see anything that affects someone's normal functioning, right? And it's different for everybody. So the 10 warning signs, so for example, my great-grandmother, right? She could never balance a checkbook. One of the top warning signs is issues with judgment or, thinking and behavior and all of that. So she could never balance a checkbook. The fact that she could never balance a checkbook wouldn't be kind of like a red flag for me as far as, okay, this is something that she could never do. But on the flip side, if she calculated it down to a penny, and then all of a sudden she couldn't do that anymore, there's a red flag, because there's a change from her normal functioning to, okay, this is something different. There's certainly something that's going on here. The same thing with, daily tasks and activities, engaging in hobbies and kind of sort of starting to isolate themselves, calling things by the wrong name. I worked in senior nursing, and a warning sign, a huge warning sign for this lady that I worked with was she was calling a watch a wrist clock. That's a warning sign, because you're not able to kind of grab that. Not having the ability to retrace your steps. Everybody loses things, right? But it's the fact that you can't go back because the memory is just no longer there. To say, okay, whenever I came in, I set my keys down here, the phone rang, I had to go grab it. This is where my keys are, right? Forgetting how to go to familiar places. Let's say you go to the same grocery store that you've been going to for 25 years. All of a sudden, you don't know where you are and you're not exactly sure how to get home, and you're having issues with some confusion. So that certainly is some warning signs there for you. And like I said, I will drop the link to the 10 warning signs here in the chat for you all as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions for Megan? Tell us a little bit more about the clinical trials, Megan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will drop the website for you all in the chat as well. But these are so, so important. If you go to alz.org/trial match, there are clinical trials that are going on all across the country. And basically, there's placebo trials. There's also drug and non-drug trials. They're really testing kind of what the specific risk are for developing the disease. There's also tests that are going on that are specific to in what ways do you live, and how do you keep yourself healthy, and how does this lower your risk. So there's clinical trials that are going on for that. There's clinical trials that are going on for the new medications that are coming out, and there's even been people that couldn't necessarily afford the medications because they hadn't been covered yet by insurance and things of that nature. And they were able to get treatment through these clinical trials as well. And they also get paid sometimes as well. So they will pay for travel in some cases. But getting the public involved is one of the only ways that we can kind of expand our research and just make sure that we're heading down the right path as far as research does go. And we're making the most impact with our dollars through the association as well.
Now, I have participated in a clinical trial before, not for Alzheimer's, but for those people who have never participated in a clinical trial, what's it like? What are some of the steps they go through?
Right. So I'm no expert. I've not experienced a clinical trial myself, but I do know on the website, it does give you step by step of kind of what goes on. But we do have a community partner here in Columbus, Georgia, and it's Dr. Liss. He's a really, really great neurologist, and he does them out of his office. So I could say that the process is relatively the same. So initially you have a consultation. You have to answer a ton of questions about your history, kind of about what you have going on, if you have a diagnosis or if you don't, just basically getting to know if whatever the clinical trial is, if it's a match for you. And that's the purpose of Trial Match as well. So it does ask you a bunch of questions, and it helps pair you up with clinical trials you may be appropriate for. And then from there, it's kind of whatever the clinical trial is designed to be. So they're all time sensitive. If it has to do with maybe just sharing information, you may have to go into their offices and get checked out and travel. It all really just depends because they're all so different. But that's kind of the general process of getting signed up and kind of figuring out what the ins and outs are there.
How effective are the medications that are provided for them? You know, how effective are they?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So based off of the trials that they've run on the new medications, the lecanemab, we're finding about 35% efficacy, which is wonderful compared to, not having anything. So like I said, it's not a cure. We're definitely on the right track. And then as far as the medications that are used to manage symptoms, that's really just a case by case basis. I mean, you can have medications that are really, really effective for someone, and it may not be as effective for someone else, or it may cause, different symptoms and side effects. So I think it's definitely worth having a chat with a doctor about what might be the most effective for you specifically and kind of weigh that out. But as far as the new medications, they're showing really, really great results for treatment purposes.
Brenda?
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late getting on. I had trouble. My question is this: how do you distinguish beginning Alzheimer's symptoms from ADHD?
Yeah, so as far as ADHD goes, I'm not an expert on that, so don't take my word for it, but I can definitely say there would be some overlap in symptoms there. But I would say the underlying cause and the way that we go about diagnosing Alzheimer's and dementia, you definitively can go have a test run and you can know for certain that that's what it is. So with the buildup of the plaques and tangles and all of that, you can have imaging done and you can make sure that it is Alzheimer's compared to something else, or it's, another disease that's related to dementia compared to something else. Coming from a mental health standpoint, I know that the symptoms of ADHD, you can have hyperactivity, you can have inattentiveness, and a lot of those symptoms would technically overlap. But with Alzheimer's and dementia too, once the stages kind of really start ramping up and you're moving from the mild stage to the moderate stage, these are going to be pretty significantly quick changes as far as being able to go from someone's baseline of functioning to what the disease has done and how far it's progressed in their body. So I would say with ADHD, it's probably more of a long-term thing. And then Alzheimer's and dementia is going to be, your more quick changes to baseline functioning.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely. So I see we got a couple in the chat. Would you say autistic-like behavior is indicative of the moderate to severe stage? So I wouldn't necessarily call it autistic behavior. That in itself is a spectrum too, just like Alzheimer's diseases. But I will say I like to compare it to childlike behavior. I like to compare Alzheimer's and dementia and aging itself as a bell curve. Okay. I have a 2-year-old and he's over here on the bell curve. And then you have someone that's aged, and here you have midlife. And then here you have someone potentially with Alzheimer's or dementia. A lot of the behaviors are going to be really, really similar just because of the way that the brain is developed, but also how the disease attacks the brain. So you're not going to have normal functioning. You're not going to have normal communication skills. You're not going to have normal personality traits. We're talking entire personality shifts that can happen. So I would say I definitely think it could be autistic-like behavior, but I certainly like to compare it more to the bell curve kind of thing. And the other question, are there any herbal holistic medicines to treat Alzheimer's? No. Not any that are, FDA approved that we at the association recommend. There's tons of people. Don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing vitamins. I take vitamins every day. I'm not bashing, healthy herbal supplements and making sure that you get your whey and your protein and all that. But there's lots of snake oils out there too. And they say, take this medication and it's going to help with your like memory and thinking and all of this other stuff. And we just don't know that to be fact. Someone said, can you elaborate on what was mentioned earlier about issues with swallowing, etc.? Yes. So as you kind of move into the more severe stage, you do have issues with swallowing and all of that, because you got to think about how the disease itself attacks the brain. So it starts with the long-term memory, the short-term memory, excuse me, and then it kind of moves forward to backward depending on what you have. Alzheimer's, that's typically how it works. But you have normal functioning. So you have your frontotemporal here where you do all of your thinking and your processing, your judgment. And then you have different parts of your brain that control different things. Well, the last thing to go is going to be what controls your swallowing, your regulation of blood pressure and all of that. But all of these major systems are controlled by the brain. So with Alzheimer's disease, in the end stages, that's where you're going to see the major effects, because that's the last thing to go. And it's at the base of the brain. And you're also going to see vision changes. People that are living with the disease have issues with color contrast. They have issues with perception and judgment. That's why they have issues with driving. So anything that your brain controls, even hormone regulation, is going to be affected by the shrinkage and the brain cell death associated with Alzheimer's disease. Those are really great questions.
So Megan, when someone dies from Alzheimer's, is it because those body functions aren't regulated anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. So someone that does organically pass away from Alzheimer's disease, yes, ma'am. But the way that it kind of happens is because it is in relation to Alzheimer's disease. But if you're having issues with swallowing and all of that, you're much more likely to pass away from dehydration or some other symptom that's related to what's happening to your body because of the disease, because of the symptoms. So yeah, absolutely. I see another hand there, Miss Doris, I believe.
Yeah, Doris. You muted, Doris. You muted. I don't know if she can unmute. Doris, can you put your question in the chat if you can't unmute?
I do see where Sharon has mentioned dehydration. She said she's seeing that as a major challenge with her dad. Yeah, that's a really common challenge, and this comes with behavioral and all of the changes in relation to the disease. Even eating. It's really, really hard to get someone to eat with Alzheimer's and dementia. Not necessarily that they're already in the severe stage. At the point that you're seeing issues with swallowing and all of that, they're probably going to be bedbound. They're going to lose, the majority of their physical functioning before that happens. But as far as dehydration and eating and things like that, as far as memory goes, you got to think sometimes, for our brain, our stomach to communicate with our brain, for our brain to tell us, hey, we're thirsty, we need to drink water. That may just not be happening there. So it's definitely a challenge.
Okay, Doris, you want to put your question in the chat? If you can't unmute.
She said, how does one deal or find support for a person who is in denial? Absolutely. That is a really great question, because that is hard. That is extremely, extremely hard. So we, of course, have some resources through the Alzheimer's Association, and you can go online and check those out for care partners specifically. We have support groups, and I always like to plug that. But as far as just being real and honest, it's difficult. I can go ahead and tell you that if someone is experiencing these changes, and family members bring it up, there's a lot of emotions that are tied to that, you know? There's denial. There's, oh, it couldn't happen to me. It's everything's fine. And they've probably noticed some of these changes within themselves. So I would suggest, and this is just my personal opinion, really educating yourself on the process of grief, and what that looks like, because they're grieving themselves and they're grieving these parts of them that they're losing. And a lot of times that's one of the reasons that this disease is so stigmatized, is because if we don't say it out loud, it's not real. It was the same thing with cancer years and years ago, right? So I would definitely educate yourself on the process of grief, and of course denial being that first stage, and kind of how to support your partner through that process. Because it certainly is such a hard place to be at. But on the other side of denial is victory, and really, being able to take advantage of those resources and building a community around yourself, because nobody has to walk through it alone. But it's it's admitting what's really going on there.
Sally?
Actually, I was trying to take my hand down. I just wanted to say that when my mom was diagnosed, she lasted after she was diagnosed. I don't know how long she had it before I got her help. But she lasted like 7 years before she passed. Then I just lost my girlfriend's mother, who got it, and she lived to be 109 years old, short of 110. And she wasn't diagnosed with dementia until a few months before she passed. She had, a few other things going on. But and then I just lost another, her father just passed, and he was recently, within maybe the last 3 years, diagnosed, and he just passed. So the thing of, dealing with grief, it's like, you don't know what to do, because you want them to keep going. You definitely don't want them to go, and you want to try to get them whatever help you can. But it's just amazing how the length of time, I don't know if it's dementia or something else where the people are passing from, but how long sometime with the dementia lingers on, and then it takes them out of here, the period of time,
Right.
yeah.
So people with Alzheimer's, specifically Alzheimer's disease, they can live up to 20 years. And it's after a diagnosis. So the average, I believe, is about 5 to 7. But yes, it could be as long as 20 years. And then you also have to think about, like we talked about earlier, with age being the number one risk factor. If your risk doubles every 5 years after 65. If you're living to 110, you've got a pretty significant risk that there's some Alzheimer's or another form of dementia going on, just simply based off of age. So it's not a disease that is specifically brought on by age. People are either predisposed to it or not. But there's also environmental factors and all of that. And age, of course, is the number one risk factor. But yeah, absolutely. You can live up to 20 years after a diagnosis. And I'm sure in some outlier cases, a little more, a little less. So yeah.
Any other questions for Megan? We've got a lot to digest. Okay, thank you so very much, Megan. We appreciate this information and the opportunity to ask questions. We thank you so very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to drop my email in the chat really quickly.
Okay.
If anybody would like to connect with me after the fact, and of course, I'll be reaching out to you, Mrs. Smith, for attendance and all that good stuff. I know Sandra
Right.
told me to connect with you. So, but here is my email for anybody that's interested, and I'll go ahead and hop off. But I certainly appreciate you all having me today, and it's been such a pleasure. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you all need anything.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to share a few things with you before we leave. Our next lunch bunch will be Wednesday, November 1st. And Anise Norman from Social Security, who is a good friend to GAE retired, will be with us. Also, I want to remind you of the Fall Leadership Conference that is sponsored by GAE, October 21st and 22nd. All of this information is in the loop. And of our pre-retirement seminar that is coming up Saturday, October 28th. And we urge you to invite members and non-members alike. It's geared especially toward those people who have an eye on retirement, who are in that 5-year shoot. But even if you are already retired, there is so much to learn that every time I participate in one of these pre-retirement seminars, I learned something that I wish I had known before. Nominations are being taken for GAE Retired at-Large Director. There's a link to the nomination form in the loop. And we are taking amendments to the Constitution and bylaws. The deadline is February 19th. Our next business meeting is January 12th. And I remind you that GAE Retired Day at the Capitol is February 6th. We haven't decided if that's going to be virtual or in person. And GAE Day at the Capitol is February 22nd. And we want retired to show up on February 22nd. So those are some of our upcoming events. I want to thank you all for being with us today. We're getting through a few minutes early, and that's good. I respect your time. So if there is not anything else for the good of the whole, we are done. And I will spend this afternoon posting recordings to the YouTube channel. Karen.
Thanks, Tony. Just also in addition, there are nomination forms in the No magazine for the Fund for Public Education Committee, or PACT committee. Deadline is November 15th for that and all the other forms. So if you want to go through and have be a member of FPE, you get to interview candidates and decide who will go through and be endorsed and if they get any funding. It's a great way to become politically involved as we go through and come up on election year 2024. So just bear that in mind. Thanks, Tony.
And I also want to point out that we are looking for volunteers to serve on the GAE Retired Nominating Committee. It's not a hard task. And we're also accepting nominations for GAE Retired Executive Officers and Committee Chairs. So please access your In the Loop. It went out last night. And the nomination form and the volunteer form are available with just a click of the mouse. So please make sure that you understand that we are accepting nominations for Executive Committee for GAE Retired, and we need people to serve on the nominating committee. And In the Loop with all of the links to all of these things that we mentioned should be in your mailbox. And tonight is Facebook Live with Dr. Craig Carter, so be sure to tune into that. All right, thank you all so much for being with us, and we will see you again on hopefully at one of our other events. October 28th is the pre-retirement seminar. Please sign up and attend and bring a guest. Anything else for the good of the whole? All right, everyone, have a nice day.